We will understand about the ISO 2022 and let's get started about this. So before we understand about the ISO 2022, let's understand something about the ISO. What does ISO stands for? ISO stands for the International Organization for the Standardization. It has membership of more than 162 countries, national standard bodies, example BIS, Bureau of Indian Standards. So just like BIS in India acts as a national standard body, similarly there are different names for the different countries' national standard bodies. So yes, it is part of ISO again. In order to bring the common understanding across the regions in every aspect of the day-to-day life activity, defined in a defined unit is set, which are followed by the member countries across the world. For example, if you see in a day-to-day activities, if, for measuring, weighing stuffs, right, they use either grams as a unit or kgs or unit, quintals, tons, and etc. Similarly, for in terms of the length, they use centimeter, meter, kilometer, and all. So ISO is the main body which acts for standardization throughout the world, who are the member into it. Same way, in terms of the financial world, communication, it has introduced a common language called as ISO 2022. So prior to this, there was some other ISO standards, but it was not standardized all the payment areas across the world. It was limited to, let's suppose, for the cross-border payment, they used to have Swift empty messages, and for card payments, they used to have ISO 8583 messages. So there wasn't a single way of communication. There was a multiple formats, and that's how ISO decided to go ahead with the one format or the way to communicate between the financial industries. So under ISO, they have different committee differentiated with respect to their area of services. As I said, in terms of day-to-day activities, in terms of weighing, measurement, or something else, there is some other committee formed under the ISO organization. And for this particular to that financial communication, ISO have a separate committee, and the committee is called as ISO TC68, right? So here we will understand about who developed ISO 2022. So ISO TC68, the ISO Technical Committee is responsible for standardization in the field of banking, securities, and other financial services. So this is the committee, a group of members, experienced member or who has been hired by the ISO teams. They decide on the areas of the standardization into banking, securities, and financial services. Now, under banking, there are different kind of areas. Securities, we have different areas. Financial services, we have different areas. All of it, in terms of standardization, ISO TC68 is the sole committee who are responsible. So its membership comprises of 29 national standardization bodies and following stakeholders organizations. So already there are 29 standardization bodies are available in terms of ISO 2022 adoption, right? And other than that, they have the other stakeholder organizations like MasterCard, Visa, Swift, etc. So these are the major players who are currently into the ISO 2022 adoption. So why was a rise of ISO 2022 came? That should be the major question right now going on, because there are a lot of standardization already available. Then why ISO 2022? What was the issue with the other formats which is already available, right? So the different messages standards have different way of using structured format syntax, and meaning of it can vary in terms of definition, right? In the below example, so if you see this example, right, the different message standards have differently defined for the same business data. For example, So ordering customer details in ISO 15022, which is Swift MT format, this 50K details carries the ordering customer details. That means account number followed by name and the address, right? Similarly, in ISO 2022, this is how it looks that it has a debtor element. Under that, sub elements are there, which is structure, name, street name, building number, postal code, town name, city, country, and the account number, right? Similarly, if you see this one is Fedwire. Now, Fedwire has its own way again, right? Under the 5000 tag originator, you will give the name and then followed by the address and so on. So if you see, there are different ways of communicating into the banking industry in terms of the payment of at least sending the 50K details. So these different names create difficulties when you are looking at end-to-end integration. So when I say end-to-end integration, right, that means imagine if you want to integrate with some new networks in future. Suppose not Swift, let's suppose some other network is developed and you want your bank want to integrate with that particular bank, or for the matter of fact the local new payment system is developed, for example similar to that of RTGS. If a country has developed it, the local banks of that particular country has to go ahead with the numerous changes, right? So then in order to migrate or integrate to that particular network or to the systems who accepts the different messages or messaging, right, it becomes very tedious for the banks in terms of cost, money, and effort. So you need expensive spot knowledge to understand what the specialists mean and how to reconcile the information, resulting high cost, time, and technology. And that's why the ISO 2022, which comes under International Standardization Body Organization, they have decided to go ahead with one single way of communication that is called as ISO 2022 messaging. And ISO 2022 messaging is nothing but just to communicate between the financial industries. Now, the uses of it under ISO 2022 is a separate thing. For example, for a single customer credit transfer, you send PAX 008, which comes under payment, clearing, and settlement messages, which is under subtype of the ISO 2022, right? Same way for the reporting, there is CAP 053, and same way for the status, we have PAX 002. For payment initiation message, we have PAN 001, and so on. So that is under that ISO 222. But the idea over here is to bring the standardization in communicating across the world, or call it as into the financial industry with one language and not with the different languages. This is some example I have taken. For example, there is ISO 8583, which is a card payment, and it uses a different language altogether. It is a flat files language which will be written in some codes, and you need to understand the standardization in order to understand that. At least from here you can understand something, but in ISO 8583 you won't be able to understand until and unless you have that handbook available with you. Okay, this is again another example. For example, 32A, validate currency and amount, and then you will have this ISO 122. You have under credit transfer, transaction information, interbank settlement, amount, currency, USD to 1,500. Similarly, interbank settlement date. There is another element where you can populate the dates. In Fedware, you have this 1520 tag under which you can define that, and so on. Now, next thing which we need to understand is how will ISO 2022 help? So ISO 2022 is the agreed methodology. I emphasize this one is agreed methodology because it is agreed and used by the financial industry to create consistent message standards across all the business processes of the industry. Now, this term business processes of the industry, meaning it can be into trade, it can be into exchange, it can be in some other aspect of banking or and credit unions, anything, So they have standardized, they needed to standardize the way to communicate between these financial industries. And that's why it is an agreed methodology used by the financial industry. All of the content described so far is stored in a common repository, which is just like a central English dictionary available at ISO 2022.org, where any financial institution can refer it for its use and to understand meaning and syntax of it. So now everything which we will discuss, or the messages which is available in ISO 2022, it is already there in that ISO 2022 org, and you have there that central repository which acts just similar to that of our typical dictionary, English dictionary book, where you can just go ahead and search with the respective item which you want to search, and you'll get the necessary information over there. So this is called as central repository, and that is what it says. All of the content described so far is stored in a common repository, which is just like a central English dictionary available at iso2022.org, right? Where any financial institution can refer it for its use and to understand meaning and syntax of it. So for each of it, there is a definition written to it, and then you can understand the various aspects related to it, right? And it is available by just opening this URL, iso2022.org, and under that you'll find the central repository and so on. Okay, now in order to bring standardization and common understanding and to communicate in one single language in the financial world, ISO 2022 was introduced, as I said. In ISO 2022, the most widely used syntax is extensible markup language, right? This XML you would have heard already. Even in the banking industry, within their internal system, imagine they have a multiple application linked to each other. So they use generally this XML based languages, or the way of sending the messages from one application to another application via this XML format itself. So that is where the use becomes, and the understanding of it becomes very easy, because most of the banks generally they use this kind of messages for their request and response stuff, even into the APIs, right? The use of short tag names like to represent a postal address is also part of a syntax. Now, this XML based language is used under ISO 2022 instead of some other, because of the fact that it is very easy to understand. If I go back and show it over here, right? If I show it to you here, you can easily understand that DBTR is somewhere related means debitor, and NM means name, postal address, PSTL, ADR. In short form, they have used to define all of the parameters. Now, so if you in the postal address, we know that there will be street name, building number, postal code, town name, country, postal address, and so on. So by looking into it, even though you are not aware of what exactly it means, but at least you can make some common sense that okay, under PSTL address it will be street name. At least you will get some idea. So it is easy to understand, and you do not need to remember the tags typically which is used in the other format of the messaging. For example, into ISO 15022, you need to remember 50K as ordering institution, right? But here you have this element called debitor. Under debitor, you can just define the name, and there are a lot more datas which you can populate in ISO 2022. You can use it to send to another party, whereas in ISO 15022 or in any other format, this enrichment of data to be sent out from one bank to another bank, or call it, say it as from one financial industry to another one, was not there. And this brings another advantages of using ISO 2022 over any other financial institution messages, right? All of the content describes, okay, let's go back here. In ISO 2022, yeah, as I said, like it will be using the XML format, and the way it is read is very easy to understand, and it has a syntax. Basically, for example, for postal address, they will use PSTL ADR. So easy to make the syntax for it. ISO 2022 represents a big opportunity to improve quality of payments, data end to end, which results in improved efficiency, compliance, and customer experience. Now, this thing was not there in earlier messages. They had this issue in terms of the data end to end, because a lot of data they were restricted not to be sent out from this ISO 15022. For example, there is a limitation under it where you cannot send more than 35 into 4 characters, and there are certain limitations in terms of sending the characters as well. Same way it was happening with some other messaging as well, where in ISO 2022 it has structured in such a way that you can provide all those data whichever in a day-to-day activity or into the payments. Generally one bank or the customer wanted to send out all those data. After doing a lot of research, they identified and they brought this, messaging where they can incorporate those information over these messages, which results in improved efficiency, compliance, and customer experience. When those information or data are passed through via the messages, then definitely it will result in improved efficiency in terms of compliance. Also, it will meet, and definitely the customer experience will be directly proportional to it. So there are several message standards available in the market, like Swift MT ISO 15022, which I told you, which is our Swift MT format messages like MT 103, 202, 202 cover from one category to 9 categories. Similarly, we have ISO 8583, which is nothing but our card payment related messaging, and also proprietary like FedWire messages. This is proprietary within the US country, and it will be understood by only the FedWire member banks for sending out or to receive or to understand the language message, which uses their own defined structure, format, syntax, and the meaning semantics. As I said, in the FedWire, they have their own format, they have own syntax, and their definition is there in their own way. So it will be available in their user handbook. So in order to imply that or to make use of that, they need to understand that handbook and they can implement like in any other message format it has. Let's understand something about the XML. So XML is one of the most popular syntaxes to encode documents or messages electronically on the internet. You would have come across with the XML related languages way back if you are already into the IT industry, right? Because even if you have worked in some normal payments, you would have seen the application using the same XML related languages to communicate between one application to another application and so on. So XML allows communities to define their own identifiers or tags and format or data type for each component of a message. Yes, that's correct. If you want to make a standardization into the XML, you can yourself define XML syntaxes, and under that you can give the values and then make use of it, right? So yeah, that is one of the feature of it, where you can define the syntaxes and then based on that you can give the data. So what happens in XML based messaging is, it will read out the values under the two tags, open and close tags. For example, street name, right? Street name, it is open, and then it will give the value for the street name, and then you'll close with the street name element. So that is how it is defined. So if you give within this, then this particular value will be picked up by the next payment application. If it receives it, and then it will act on it. With XML, data is marked up by using opening and closing tags that indicate the meaning of the structure of the information that is communicated. For example, 2019-09-29 is an XML representation of 29 September 2019. So I had taken this example over here. So if it uses this 2019-10-29 on the interbank settlement date, then it's used for the interbank settlement date for that currency to be paid to the bank. The combination of opening and closing tags with the data is called as an element, right? So this combination, str name, opening, and then closing together is called as element. So this is called as element. So basically you can call it as strtnm as an element, PSTL address. PSTL ADR is a postal address, which is an, opening and then closing of it here, right, is an element. Now, under that one element, there can be a sub elements. As I said, under PSTL ADR element, there are sub elements like street name, building number, postal code, town name, country, etc. So this is about the XML. Let's understand about the ISO 2022 business domains. I have spoken to you as of now why the use of 2022 ISO message came, what was the issues with the earlier messaging, right? But now, what are the business domains where this ISO 2022 can be implemented or can be used for the communication between the finance industries? So we have the payments and cash management domain. So for example, for the payment, you have retail payment, right? Like single customer credit transfer payments, or multiple customer credit transfer payment, or financial industries related fund transfer payments. Like if I have to correlate with MTs, you can correlate with your MT103, MT202, MT202 cover, MT205, MT205 cover, 202, 102, MT101, and so on. Similarly with the cash management as well. If I have to compare it with your MT messages, then you have your MT940, MT950, you have the MT900, MT910, right? So those are the cash management messages, basically the reports which you get for the account statement. That is also a part of the cash management camp messages. Another is the securities. Now, in terms of the securities field as well, this ISO 122 business domain messages are used, and I'm not so sure about the different messages which are used in the securities because this is not part of our syllabus. We will be majorly focusing in payment and cash management related messaging because it will be used in our retail payment of the banking. That's why we'll be focusing more on that, and along with the payment initiation messages. We have this ISO 2022 messaging implemented into the trade services, into the foreign exchanges. So if you remember foreign exchange, we had this MT3 series, right, which were used for the foreign exchange payment. So that is also implemented with using this ISO 2022. Card payment, right? Earlier it was using this 8583. Now going forward, if it is implemented, they will use this ISO 2022 messaging. Now, how it will use what different messaging under this ISO 2022 it has, which can be implemented under this card payment or foreign exchange, trade services, or securities, that you can go ahead and look into this ISO 2022 website if you are into that particular field. But since we are focusing on the payment and cash management in terms of the banking payments, right, we will be focusing over here itself. This is the first one. So there are certain message definitions for each of the business domains, like ACMT is for the account management, AUTH is for authorities, CAMT is for cash management. So if it is CAMT.053, that means MT940, that is your account statement reports. Similarly for payment clearing and settlement, that corresponds to your PAX. So the message PAX.008 means customer credit transfer payment message, which is equivalent to that of our MT103, and so on. There are multiple messages over there. We'll understand in a while. So we have payment initiation messages as well, right? Pin 001 and pin 002, which corresponds to your MT101 with in MT formats. We'll understand that as well. There are REMT payment remittance advice. So that I'm not sure. We'll see afterwards. Okay. Now there are certain message sets under cash management, right? So we have CAN 052, which is for bank to customer account report. We have CAN 053, which is bank to customer statement. So remember, we in the banking, at the end of the day, they used to send one from one bank to another bank throughout the day. After at the end of the day, they used to send this account statement report in MT940 format, or if it is a regional payment system, some of them use MT950 format as well. So that is same as that of CAM 053, but it is using this XML related messaging instead of using this message text, basically empties. Okay, now there is CAM 054, bank to customer debit credit notification, CAM 056, financial industry to financial industry, cancellation request, which is comparable with that of MT191, CAM 057, notification to receive, and this can be comparable to your MT210 of your Swift MT-message. Now, here is what we'll be spending much of our time to understand the different payment clearing and settlement messages. That is PAX 002, which is financial industry to, financial institution to financial institution payment status report. And PAX 004, which is a payment return. PAX 008, which is financial industry to financial industry customer credit transfer, which is comparable to that of our MT103. We have PAX 009, which is financial institution credit transfer, which is comparable to your MT202, bank to bank financial institution fund transfer message. Now we have certain sets in payment initiation messages, which is PIN 001, 002, and 012. 001 is for the customer credit transfer initiation. It is comparable to that of our MT101, and then customer payment status report is 002, and there is creator payment activation request, call it as PIN 012. So we'll focus on PIN 001 over here.